I'm here today with Susan Waller Lehmann. She's a private investigator, criminal defense, and capital mitigation specialist, a journalist, an award-winning author. She's written several great articles for Pursuit magazine, and she's got a new book out. It's a collection of stories about her casework in the Deep South, from process service and bitter divorce cases to capital murder cases. Southern Lies and Homicides is an honest peek behind the curtain of what a private investigator's work is really like. Often tedious, sometimes alarming, and occasionally heartbreaking. It's part memoir, part field guide, and it's an essential read for anyone who's considering this profession. Susan, I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to be here. Welcome.
Thank you, Hal, for having me.
Susan, reading through your bio that our producer Kim Green so graciously put together, I have this fear that you and I are going to have a lot to talk about. We do some very similar things. This world of criminal defense work is one part fun and engaging and exciting and filled with curiosity, and in another part of just gut-wrenching, painful outcomes over and over and over again. So that when you do get a good outcome, you really feel like celebrating, because the bad outcomes, the not so good outcomes, happen so often in this work. It can be a little bit off-putting. But tell us a little bit about your background. How did you become a private investigator?
I worked as a journalist in my early to mid-20s. Worked daily newspaper, and I wanted the crime beat. I've always been fascinated with crime. And fast forward, had 3 little kids, a divorce, and had to kind of figure out how to make my way and support everybody. And I started doing a little bit of work in Florida with another investigator. And in Florida, they have pretty stringent licensing rules, especially back in the 80s and the early 90s. And it really wasn't until I remarried a few years later and my husband's job, Peter's job, was transferred to Alabama. And I applied for several different jobs in Montgomery once I got the kids sort of settled. And I just kind of didn't, I'd come in second. I just wasn't landing anything. And I was having this conversation with myself. I was doing some substitute teaching and doing things like that. And I had this conversation, what would my dream job be? What could I do where I could have interesting work, not be tied to an office, and still have time to deal with a husband and children and a household and all of that. And I realized, taking stock of what I like to do best, I'm very nosy. I'm very good at gathering records. I love talking to people and having them tell me their deepest, darkest secrets. So I decided to become a private investigator. And the more I thought about it, the more I liked it. I liked the idea. And back in those days, Alabama didn't have any licensing requirements, which was kind of interesting. But I also knew that I knew nothing really about it, and that I needed to work with someone else, and I needed to learn the lay of the land and um, what the rules were regarding following people. How to stay out of trouble, but still do the job. So I talked my way into a job with an agency, and worked with a guy. He was pretty interesting, but his mantra was that women can't be good private investigators because they can't do surveillance without having to leave a post. Yep. Yeah.
All right.
So,
I take umbrage with that. Like, my buddy Manny
it's fine.
Suarez retired from the FBI, and he has often
Mhm.
said women make such better surveillance operatives than men because they just blend in so much easier. They have
Mhm.
it's nothing for a female investigator to be able to swap outfits, and we dudes, like I'm 6'2", 200 and some odd pounds with a big beard. Like there's only so much I can do to change my appearance. I think women make much better investigators. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Sure. So, his idea was that if I had to sit along surveillance, I would likely have to use the restroom and would have to leave a post. And that was his rationale. But he would constantly tell me that I would never make a very good investigator because I could never do surveillance like that. Well, and then on the other hand, he was terrified. He didn't want to teach me too many things because he didn't want me to compete against him. And ultimately, I walked out of his office one day and decided to go on my own, and I did.
So in the early part of your career, look, like most of us in this business, that started without a lot of knowledge about the business. You go through this phase of, you do some surveillance work, you do some process service, you do kind of, when people say private investigator, like a lot of people have a notion of what a private investigator does. But private investigator covers a huge swath of skill sets, from mitigation work to due diligence for corporate mergers to everything in between, to divorces, to process service, all that stuff. Tell me about how it was learning to do the divorce cases and the service of process.
Well, what I will say is that I built my agency by serving papers, and that's how I started. And I started with one attorney and one set of papers, and I had to go to Selma, Alabama, and serve them. And I had no idea what I was doing, except go to the courthouse, file the papers, serve them. And I asked a lot of questions. And it's fair to say that probably 98% of the work that I have had over the past 3 decades has come from attorneys. And so I'm hesitant. I don't really do the work anymore, but I was always very hesitant to take work directly from people. I wanted to have a lawyer behind me. And that way, if I had questions, if I had concerns, if I didn't know exactly what I was doing, if I needed to know what was legal and what wasn't, where was that line, I would talk to the lawyers.
Yeah.
And it was essentially their case. It was their case, whether it was serving papers for them, or a divorce case, or a custody case, or an embezzlement case, or a criminal defense case, or a mitigation case. It's the lawyer's case. And I just found that I felt more comfortable doing the work if I had a lawyer involved, and knew what I was doing and could essentially guide me. And so that was how I started, and that was how I built my business.
And I think that's really good advice for a number of reasons. Number one, I don't take cases from individuals. I don't do it. I if an individual calls me about a case, I encourage them to hire a lawyer to then hire me, because for a number of reasons, having that legal mind there to quarterback some of the decision-making processes is usually very helpful.
Mhm.
From a payment perspective, I tell the client, I have the lawyer take payment from the client and put it in their trust account. And then I draw off of that as I need
Mhm.
to.
Mhm.
It's cleaner billing wise. And lastly, as an agent of an attorney, and an investigator is an agent of the attorney, it's the attorney's actions. You're doing actions on behalf of the attorney. So there's a lot more protection there in terms of discoverability and stuff like that. It's helpful for the client. It's helpful for the attorney. It's helpful for us. It's just an easier, cleaner way to do it. The other thing you said that I just absolutely love is, you said, I'm curious, I'm nosy, all those things. I was presenting at the North Carolina Association of Private Investigators conference last year. And during the question and answer session, I was talking about criminal defense work. And a young investigator asked me, so he goes, I've always wanted to get into criminal defense work, and I don't know any attorneys. And what does it take to be a good criminal defense investigator? And I said, look, I could sit up here and tell you, you need to do this, you need to do this, you need to do this. But if you're willing to work for a baby attorney who has just passed the bar, who has gotten themselves on the appointed roster for indigent cases in your state, any assistance you give them is more than they have. So you're going to be helpful regardless of your background and experience and all those things. Number two, the real requirements for being a private investigator, a really good private investigator, are you have to be a curious pain in the ass.
Yeah. Not afraid to ask those questions and snoop around any chance, anything you have.
Yeah.
The how I approached it is along with what you're saying is I approached everything with the expectation that it could go to court. Everything from a simple process service that could have been contested. This was back in the day when you didn't carry, you didn't photograph, you didn't videotape what you were doing. We didn't have smartphones. I started in 1996 is when I opened my agency. And that was sort of the dark ages compared to where we are now, in terms of gathering information and in terms of following people. I have found that the phone calls that I get from average citizens actually scare me. I really don't take the cases anymore just because of the things that they think that they can do.
Yeah.
And that's why it's always good advice to have an attorney. Have an
Yeah.
attorney. Talk to
Yeah.
an attorney.
Yeah.
Yep.
Work for an attorney.
Mhm.
Susan, you have kindly written for Pursuit Magazine over the past several years. And one of the things that strikes me about the pieces that you do for Pursuit Magazine is they go much deeper than a simple how to be a private eye story. And I'm thinking specifically of a piece you wrote back in 2017 called The Process Service. It's not just about how to hand over documents. Tell us a story about that service. What was that like?
That was that was uh, that was a service that still makes me emotional, a bit. It had started one morning. I got a phone call from an attorney's office in Wetumpka, Alabama, where I lived, a little town, and the they wanted these papers served to this woman's house, and you know, I would often pick up those services that were going to be very difficult, where the subject was evading service, where maybe the sheriff's office had been there and they wouldn't open the door. Um, the difficult services because people didn't expect me to be serving papers. So I knew from talking with the legal secretary that this was going to be a difficult service. So before I picked up the papers, I went to the Winn-Dixie grocery store and I picked up some flowers and a balloon. And I knew that it was a uh, contested custody case, and it was the the great aunt or the grandmother. It was one or two. An older woman was caring for a young child,
Mm-hmm.
and she was being asked to surrender the child back to the mother. And legally, the mother had all the rights, but there were extenuating circumstances. And the attorney wanted me to get into the house. It wasn't just a service. It wasn't just here's these papers and show up in court and bring the child to talk to the judge. It was please get into the house. So, so there I was, and stood at the door with kind of the papers in a folder behind my back, and I had these flowers and a balloon, and this woman very graciously let me in, and she invited me in. She just was thrilled to talk to me and thrilled that somebody would bring her flowers. And then I got to the heart of it. And I said, I have these papers for you. And I need you to come to court tomorrow morning. And I need you to bring your niece or a great niece or whatever this situation was. I think it was a great niece. And little girl was 7. And she went into this background. The house was immaculate. It was teeny. It was not a mansion. It was not even but it was immaculate and well done. And this woman was extraordinarily well spoken. And she gave me the background of the child and how the child had been removed from the mother. The child was covered in scabies, and she was filthy, and she was malnourished, and she had not been in any kind of daycare, any kind of situation. And this woman took this child into her home and loved this child and got the child into church, got the child into counseling while the mother was in prison. And and it just destroyed her, the thought of having to turn this child back over to her mother, even though her mother had successfully completed her programs and that sort of thing. But I probably was with her for maybe a good solid hour and a half,
Wow.
and just completely heard the story and heard the story about what had happened to her niece and heard the story about all of the whole background of the circumstance that brought me there that day. And during the course of it, we actually were able to brainstorm and come up with a solution that was workable for this woman and her great niece and her niece. And at the end of it, it was pretty emotional. At the end of it, she asked me if she could keep the flowers. And I said, oh, absolutely. And she said no one had ever brought her flowers before. And so it was just one of those moments where it could have been a very adversarial, it could have been very hostile, it could have left this woman just devastated. Um, but we actually were able to talk, and we were able to sort of brainstorm and sort of come up with ideas that would work with the
Yeah.
court. And
Yep.
so that was that story.
And the thing that hits me there is, somebody could have been hired to serve process, knock on the door, slap the papers in her hand, said, "You've been served," and walked away. Um,
Yeah.
Technically, job done. But having the ability to have some empathy, to talk to someone, and also the assignment of like, I need for you to, get in and see what the circumstance looks like at this house. That's part of your job as an investigator is to, you know, do that research, make the observations, see what the house looks
Oh,
like.
sure.
And all of that stuff informs, how we do our work. But the ability to show some empathy and to listen to someone's story and have a conversation. The
Mhm.
job is hand the papers over, get them to court tomorrow. But
Right.
there's more to
And
the
turn in
job
your
than just the
billing.
job.
Yeah. Yeah. But
Yeah.
but I found that um, during the first 10 years of my tenure, 9 years of my tenure in Alabama, um, I learned about DepoNet, and so I began serving a lot of papers that were coming in from out of state that needed to be served. And I went all over Alabama, essentially, and into Columbus, Georgia, and all around there. So I kind of had a route that I would
Yeah.
serve. And I found that my most valuable skill was being able to take details back to the attorneys, what the situation is. And I continued to serve papers up until 2018. And then in 2018, I had an incident that happened in Utah, and I will never serve another paper again because of it. But I have found that by simply standing on someone's doorstep and saying, look, I've got these papers for you, and let's talk about this. And people will tell you their stories. They lost their jobs, somebody has cancer, they've fallen on hard times. This was not what they wanted. Um, and you can get those details, and then you say to them, please call this attorney and see what you can work out and stop this process before it gets worse. And so that was a lot of what I did serving papers.
Yeah.
It was very rarely adversarial. Although I always had a knot in my stomach every time I would go to serve papers because you never knew what to expect.
I don't do a lot of service of process. I've done a good bit of it. I don't do any anymore. Um, I would rather go knock on a door to talk to a witness in a murder case than I would to go serve papers in a divorce case.
And that was funny
Um,
because when people found out that I started doing the capital work and I was going to prisons and I was going to family members and I was going to, aren't you terrified? Well, truth be told, there was always that moment before you would go into a maximum security death penalty prison, Atmore being one, Georgia classification, diagnostic and classification for another. Anytime that you go into places like that, you have a lot of apprehension because a whole lot of things can go wrong. But truthfully, I felt much safer doing criminal defense work than I did working divorce cases.
oh,
Divorce cases is where you're going to get in trouble. Custody
yeah,
cases, divorce cases, boy, those things can turn hostile and bad very, very quickly.
yeah.
And you never know if you can even trust your client. That's the problem.
Look, I have no problem with people doing divorce work. It is work that needs to be done. And I have done it. I have no shame in having done it.
Yeah.
I do think that, just as you just said, I feel safer doing criminal defense investigations than I do doing family dissolution investigations.
Remember, there was a whole spate of attorneys that were getting shot, family law attorneys and that sort of thing. I mean, it's just a very, you're threatening a person, man,
you're
woman,
you're
with
threatening their identity, their ego,
loss of
their
assets, all of it.
everything. Yeah, yeah. And you mentioned going into maximum security facility. I've been on a number of death row visitations, and look, for those out there in the listening audience that aren't private investigators, it's really difficult to explain the feeling of going through a series of sally ports and the solid metal thud when that door shuts behind you, or the auto lock goes through the bars on the door frame. Like it is unnerving. My heart rate always goes up when I go into a sally port. I don't know why, but it does.
The
But once you,
klaxons, the
huh?
sounds, the klaxons,
Oh
the
yeah,
sounds, just the sounds are just overwhelming.
yeah, yeah. The divorce cases, like, I have made the argument, and I've thought about this, and I agree with myself. everything we do, everything we do as private investigators, our entire job is founded on unnecessary human drama. Like, did did he really need to have an affair with his secretary? Did she really need to go and
No,
have an affair
yeah.
with the pool boy? No, unnecessary.
Did that woman need to embezzle all the money from this company? Yeah, no.
Unnecessary. Or
Yeah,
or she had an affair with the pool boy. Did mommy has an affair with the pool boy? Daddy decides he needs to kill mommy, or he needs to kill pool boy. And it's like, that seems unnecessary to me. Um,
yeah, yeah.
in criminal cases, civil cases, 9 times out of 10, the work we do is based on some form of unnecessary human drama. Um, I want to talk about this. I'm going to pivot now to another topic.
But put in those terms, though, yeah, all of the work is really dumb stuff. Yeah, in terms of cleaning up somebody's messes that they created or somebody created,
Yeah,
and we have to come in and clean it up,
yeah.
or at least try to sort it out. And
Help
and yeah,
help help the attorney understand the information in as clear a way as possible.
mhm.
I talk about unraveling the pot of spaghetti. You know, and part of that, I do want to pivot because I want to talk
Okay.
about another story that you did for Pursuit Magazine. It is one of the things that we private investigators do on occasion. I think some of the public are kind of shocked that we do this sometimes. And I want to be very clear. The thing we're about to talk about, the thing I'm teasing so greatly, be very aware of the rules and laws in whatever jurisdiction you work. In most of the parts of Tennessee and Texas where I work, if someone has put their trash out on the street or in the back alley, it is available for public, to come by and put their trash or take it out. It is considered okay to pull the trash. You had a story in Pursuit magazine back in 2022 about garbage, the dirty work. What kind of information do you find in the trash?
Well, you can find pretty much whatever you're looking for in the trash. But you do need to know. You do need to know what's legally acceptable. And generally speaking, if the garbage is in the garbage can and the can is at the curb, not on your property, it's acceptable. You can take it. It's a little questionable. You don't want neighbors to see you, trying to find that sweet spot of, when you should go and pull the garbage. It usually involves calling the company to find out what time approximately the trucks go, and then planning your day around that. But there's a whole chain of custody issue, and it's better if you have somebody or some ability to videotape while you're taking it. And then as you go through it, you need to have that video camera set up so that there's no claim of foul, planting evidence or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I have found primarily financial records.
Yeah.
And I found evidence of cheating, but really what you're looking at in these cases is you're looking at financial records. And especially when it pertains to a divorce, because the judges almost don't seem to care that much about who's cheating on whom, but what they do care about is the spending of financial assets or marital assets on a boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah.
That's the troubling part, and that's what you want to find. I have found receipts for credit card purchases made on credit cards that my client had known nothing about, the spouse had known nothing about. There had been a hidden credit card. I found receipts. I found receipts for dinners. I found receipts, that sort of thing that the client knew nothing about. You can find all of that kind of stuff, but I have to tell you what else you can find. You can find the dirty cat litter, and you can find the really yucky diapers too. So, you would ask that question, all right, so I need to pull the garbage. Is there a baby in the house? Are there cats in the house? I completely blew open a corporate embezzlement case where the woman had been she'd been cooking the books for years, and she would throw away evidence of the money that she and her son were taking out of the company. So you find those things, and depending on how you grab them and you videotape them and you document it, that's really very usable.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's important both in these civil cases and also in the criminal cases, at least as far as I was concerned, was we wanted to try to settle out of court. We always tried to work toward a settlement, toward some sort of ability to resolve issues without them going to trial. So,
yeah.
And that often, presenting somebody in a deposition with that kind of evidence would usually speed along resolution.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. All right. So from this section of the podcast, I have a pro tip for people out there in the world. shred, shred, shred your financial documents. Shred them. Just shred them. It's super easy. Buy a shredder, run your paper documents through a shredder. Keep people like us from pulling your documents out of the trash. I found one time, I think it was 16 iterations of a business plan from an entrepreneur who was stealing ideas from another company, and they had the stolen ideas and their business plan literally stapled side by side in the trash, and then a bunch of variations on the theme. Pro tip for the investigators out there. If you're doing this kind of work, again, I beg you, be very aware of the rules and laws in whatever jurisdiction you're working. If it is not legal to take the trash, do not take it. And I love Susan's suggestion to videotape the entire process. We do have to think about chain of custody. I will say this, Susan, I have had really good luck. I have a pickup truck that I drive on a daily basis, and I have had really good luck by putting these pre-made placards on the side of the truck, and those magnetic signs that stick on the side of the truck. And it literally says, it's got the recycling symbol on it, and the company name, the fake company name, is Recycle Research. And I've had neighbors stop me. Why are you taking that trash? Well, I work for a company called Recycle Research. We determine the feasibility of curbside recycling in certain neighborhoods. And they always say, oh my God, thank you. That's so awesome.
It's pretty brilliant.
All right.
It almost makes me want to go back in the business.
I know, right? Okay, so we talked about, the nasty divorce work, digging the trash cans, those kind of things. Let's move on to the part that has literally captured my heart over the past few years. And based on conversations with you, reading your writing, I think it's probably gotten your heart as well. Criminal defense work and mitigation work. Explain mitigation to people that don't know what that means.
Mitigation is where you want to find out everything that you can about your client. You want to find, it's essentially the who, what, when, where, why, and how. You want to try to understand how your client got himself or herself into this mess.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the thesis statement for mitigation. So what I would do as an investigator was very much a holistic. Meet with the lawyers first, understand the nature of the crime, look at the crime scene photos, look at whatever the case may be, but then meet with client. And you want to try to find out as much information as you can from the client. Who he is, what type of education she's had, family members, family history, background, socioeconomic status, all of that. And while you're asking these questions and you're filling out this questionnaire, you're picking up other information. You're picking up information in terms of who the family is, what the family structure is, who the point people are, who are the people that it's not, sometimes it's mom, sometimes it's not. Where's the father in the whole equation? But you're trying to build a holistic background on your client. And at the same time, you're also trying to assess, is this person capable of working with me and helping me understand this crime? And what is the best way for me to try to work with this client? My last capital case, I worked 37 capital cases over 20 some odd years. My last capital case was a young man who probably sum total in his entire life attended 1 year of school, and that was in elementary school. He was illiterate. He could not read. He could not write. And multiple testing showed that his IQ was probably around 55. And so when you start working with your clients, you're starting to make those, what other types of evaluations, what other types of issues do you have here, so that you can alert the team, the lawyers, and you can say, okay, this is what I'm finding. And after every single interview, that I conducted on all of these cases, I would type up my case notes and then have an action plan of what I think and where we need to go next, and how do we best pull this apart, and how do we best defend the client. And I will say that particularly on post-conviction cases, I would typically be on a case for 2 years.
Yeah.
And you're working other cases too. As I said, I worked, 37 cases in a little over 20 years. And there were many times where I was balancing 5 or 6 cases at once, particularly in Alabama, because Alabama was, Alabama, Texas, those are, ground zero for death penalty states, for death penalty cases. So it was a lot of work. And the first thing that you had to do was establish trust with your client. These are typically people who've been let down by the system, and you're walking into family situations where family members are disenfranchised from the system, because I was working only on pro bono work, state defense work. These were not private hire. My clients had no money. Their families had no money. And so it was interesting, particularly as a middle-aged white woman, walking into situations, not knowing what to expect, but having to win the support and win the trust of not only the client, but all the family members as well. So
Yeah. Yeah. It can be gut-wrenching work. It can be detailed work. It's often disturbing work. Some of the stories you hear in the course of a mitigation investigation. And one of the things I've had attorneys that I've worked with say, well, I don't want to do a mitigation case. That means we're admitting we're going to lose. Like, no, no, no. This actually helps us all in the process of a pretrial, investigation to learn as much
it
as
does.
possible. But if things do go bad, if you do end up with a bad result, if you've done a really good job on the mitigation part of the investigation, you've got stuff that you can present in the sentencing phase that may very
Absolutely.
much be helpful to your client.
Yeah,
Susan,
and that's for trial level. Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely. I would be building the sentencing phase. Because most of the time, the prosecutors have it right. Most of the time, they have the right defendant. They have, so it would be, okay, who out of everybody have I interviewed? Who should we put on? Who should we put on? God forbid we're going to trial. Um, yeah, who do we put on? Who testifies? Um, who is going to tell the jury and the judge why this person's life matters?
yep, yep,
That's
that's
what it
it.
is. And it's important. That's when you have to look at everybody, no matter what they've done, and you have to look at them as a human being, and you have to be able to tell their story in a way that helps people understand how this happened.
And we work our way right back around to the need for empathy as a private investigator. Susan, you have an article coming out in Pursuit Magazine. It's actually an excerpt from your book called "The Persecution Rests." It's about a client of yours we'll call Amanda.
I mean,
Tell us about Amanda and how did she become your client?
I wasn't taking any more cases. This was towards the end of 2011 in Alabama, and my husband and I had just learned that we were going to be moving to Utah. So I had a handful of open capital cases, both pre-trial and post-conviction, and I wasn't taking any more cases. The Equal Justice Initiative out of Montgomery, nonprofit clearinghouse, essentially, uh, was often recommending me. At that point in time, I don't know what the situation is now. I haven't worked in Alabama in 10 years, but um, the situation was they just did not have any mitigation investigators. Mitigation was just not done. And so you have a whole lot of people on death row in Alabama who essentially um, had ineffective trials because there was no mitigation conducted for them. Um, but there just weren't investigators. There were a couple of us. One did a lot of federal work, and she and I kind of worked together on a couple of cases. But really and truly, it was wide open at that
Mm-hmm.
point.
Mm-hmm.
And so EJI got my name from the first case that I worked on, which was the Melvin Davis case. That was the first case that I was brought in on. Melvin had been on death row for about, I don't know, 10 years or so. And his appeals got picked up by a trio of attorneys from Palo Alto and Washington, D.C., and a local Birmingham firm was providing local counsel. And so I ended up working that case because I was in the Rolodex or the database for these attorneys in Birmingham as an investigator in Montgomery. And I had served tons of papers for them. And so it was just one of these off chances. Can you pull some records for us? That was how it started. EJI got my name out of that first one. And after that, it seemed like every time there was a capital murder suspect, a defendant charged with capital murder throughout the state of Alabama, I would get a call. And it was difficult to take that work at that time because neither the mitigation specialist or the attorneys got paid until a case was completely resolved. And so I could be working a year or two without any money, completely working on my own on these cases. So the post-conviction cases were a godsend because those were huge pro bono coming out of huge firms across the country. And that gave me enough cash flow so that I could do both the pretrial and the post-conviction. So that was how that worked.
Okay, very good. Um, the thing that I have found over the past 15 years working on criminal defense cases is um, you go into this work as a younger investigator, and I came to the business of investigations relatively late in life. But you go into the business with this notion of I'm going to do good work, I'm going to fight the good fight, and you realize pretty quickly, like we said at the beginning of the podcast, this can be very disappointing work over and over and over again. Um, but we we have the ability as investigators, as mitigation specialists, to help attorneys tell better stories, to help them possibly get better outcomes for their client, which is what their entire job is, to get the absolute best outcome they can for their client. But this work does have an impact on your life. It does impact how you view the world. I'm sure you, as I do, have some cases that just are going to haunt me for the rest of my life. Um,
Absolutely. Absolutely. Where I was going at with EJI was that EJI recommended me to this particular attorney, and he was a second chair attorney in Amanda's case. He had absolutely no criminal experience, none. He was you know, a divorce and family and will attorney, and he was second chair. The first chair attorney had criminal experience, a lot of criminal experience, but he was pretty much cashed out. He had been the first attorney when Amanda's case first happened, and her family hired him. Um, and then they ran through all of their money, and once the money was gone, um, and she was charged with capital murder, then he went to the state for resources, but it just wasn't enough money to interest him. So the second chair attorney was one who called me, and he had no experience at all. And he begged me to take the case. And I said, I can't, I simply can't take it. We're moving. I cannot take on another case. But he was pretty good, and he cajoled, he got me. And I said, all right, I'll come up and I'll consult with you one afternoon. I'll meet the client and I'll consult with you one afternoon. And that was all it took. I often say that I won't go to the Humane Society because I'm likely to come home with some animals. And that was sort of, I I knew better than to go and meet this client. I knew better than to go and meet Amanda. But I ended up taking on her case anyway. She was there was something about her that just really touched me very deeply.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I adore this work. I think it is some of the most fulfilling work I've ever done in my life. And I appreciate the fact that you're coming from what seems to be the same place, which is this is fulfilling work. It is meaningful work. Is it always? Is it even ever lucrative? Probably not. Uh, we pay the bills. We're never going to get rich being criminal defense investigators. But at the end of the day, it is meaningful work, and it's work that you can do, and even making a small difference in these criminal cases is a big deal. I got a note, Susan, day before yesterday from a young investigator down in Florida who had taken our criminal defense investigations class on PI education 4 years ago. He apparently got very inspired about the work and just went out and applied to work on some indigent cases, got appointed on some cases. Fast forward 4 years later, he's got a thriving criminal defense business. He's working for private pay clients, and he feels like he's making a difference and doing really good work. So, Susan, thank you for taking the time to be with us. Thank you for talking about this work. I think it's incredibly important. And I do want to say I'm really looking forward to reading Southern Lies and Homicides, Susan Lehmann's new collection of short stories, or stories about her long career as a private investigator. Great read. Susan, where will we be able to buy this book?
You'll be able to find it at all of the usual outlets for book buying: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Apple Store. You can always go into your favorite bookstore and order it, because it'll be available through Ingram Spark or however else these books magically appear. And I'm looking forward to it too. So
I love it. Susan, thanks so much again for being here.
Thank you, Hal. I appreciate that very much.
That is The Sound of Pursuit. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Join us again for the next episode.
You've been listening to The Sound of Pursuit, a podcast by Pursuit Magazine and PI Education.